For centuries, people have debated the existence of Jesus. Some claim he's nothing more than a myth, while others say the evidence is undeniable. But what does history really say? Today, we're breaking down the top 5 undeniable proofs that Jesus really existed. And trust me, you don't want to miss proof number 1 because it's something even skeptics struggle to explain. So stick around to the end, and let's dive in.
Christus, from whom the name Christians had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate.
The first proof of Jesus' existence doesn't come from the Bible, but from Roman and Jewish historians who had no reason to support Christianity. Let's start with Tacitus, one of the most respected Roman historians. Around 116 AD, he wrote about Jesus in his work Annals. Here's what he said, this is huge. Tacitus confirms that Jesus was a real person who was executed under Pontius Pilate, just like the Bible says, and he wasn't alone. Another Roman historian, Suetonius, also mentioned Jesus when describing Emperor Claudius's expulsion of Jews from Rome, saying,
Because the Jews at Rome caused continuous disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from the city.
Many scholars believe Christus refers to Christ, proving that his movement was already causing waves in the Roman world. But let's not forget Flavius Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian. He wrote Antiquities of the Jews in 93 AD, where he mentions Jesus multiple times. In one passage, he describes Jesus as
a wise man, a doer of wonderful works. He was condemned to the cross under Pontius Pilate.
Remember, Josephus was not a Christian. He was a Jewish historian writing for the Romans. Yet, he confirms that Jesus was a real person who was crucified. These non-Christian sources prove that Jesus wasn't just some religious idea. He was a real figure in history.
If Jesus wasn't real, then why do we have so many early Christian writings talking about him, written outside the Bible? These aren't legends from centuries later. They're documents written by people who were either eyewitnesses of Jesus or knew his disciples personally.
For example, Clement of Rome, writing in 95 AD, describes Jesus' teachings, his crucifixion, and his resurrection. Then there's Ignatius of Antioch, who wrote about Jesus around 110 AD. He referred to Jesus as the Son of God, and spoke of his crucifixion as a historical fact. And let's not forget Polycarp, a direct disciple of John the Apostle. He was arrested and sentenced to death, but before he died, he wrote letters confirming Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. If Jesus was just a made-up figure, why would these men be willing to die for him? Legends don't inspire people to face torture, but real encounters with a real person do.
Did you know that archaeology has confirmed many of the details found in the Gospels? One of the biggest discoveries is the Pilate stone found in 1961 in Caesarea Maritima. This inscription proves that Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus to death, was a real historical figure.
Another fascinating find is the Nazareth inscription, an ancient Greek tablet warning against removing bodies from tombs. Some scholars believe this decree was issued in response to Jesus' resurrection. And let's not forget the discoveries of first-century synagogues in Capernaum, which match the locations where Jesus is said to have preached in the Gospels. All of these discoveries show that the events described in the Bible took place in real locations with real people. Number 2, the explosion of Christianity. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for Jesus' existence is the rapid and unstoppable spread of Christianity. If Jesus were merely a myth, how did his message explode across the Roman Empire so quickly, despite intense persecution? Think about this. Jesus was a Jewish teacher from a small town in Galilee with no political power, no army, and no wealth. He was crucified as a criminal, a shameful death in Roman society. By all logic, his movement should have died with him. But something extraordinary happened. His followers, many of whom had fled in fear when he was arrested, suddenly became bold, fearless preachers of his message. Within just a few decades, Christianity spread like wildfire, reaching cities like Rome, Corinth, Antioch, Alexandria, and beyond. The apostles were willing to die for their belief. Skeptics argue that the disciples could have invented Jesus' resurrection. But that theory falls apart when you look at how they lived and died. Here's a fact. People don't willingly die for something they know is a lie. Yet history records that nearly every single one of Jesus' closest followers was tortured and killed rather than deny their faith. Peter crucified upside down in Rome, James, Jesus' brother, stoned to death, Paul beheaded by Emperor Nero, Thomas speared to death in India, Andrew crucified on an X-shaped cross, Bartholomew skinned alive and then beheaded, and the list goes on. These men were in a unique position to know whether Jesus' resurrection was real or fake. They weren't just spreading a philosophy, they were eyewitnesses claiming, "We have seen him, we have touched him." Why would they willingly suffer horrific deaths for a made-up story? The only reasonable answer is because they saw Jesus alive again. Roman officials confirmed Christianity's early growth, and guess what? Even Roman officials took notice. In 112 AD, Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor, wrote to Emperor Trajan about the troublesome Christians who worshiped Jesus as a god. The Roman historian Tacitus called Christianity a mischievous superstition that had spread to Rome in large numbers. The Emperor Nero was so alarmed by Christianity's growth that he blamed Christians for the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD and launched brutal persecutions. All of this shows that Jesus was no myth. His movement had real historical impact, and it terrified the Roman Empire. Imagine a world where the entire Roman government is trying to erase your faith, where becoming a Christian means risking torture, exile, or death. And yet, despite all this, Christianity not only survived, but it thrived. By the 4th century, it had spread so far that Emperor Constantine legalized it in 313 AD. If Jesus wasn't real, if he was just a legend, then why did people refuse to give up their belief in him, no matter the cost? The best explanation? Because they had encountered the truth. Number 1. Eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Now, let's talk about the strongest proof of all, the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. The New Testament is not a collection of fairy tales, it is historical testimony, written by people who saw Jesus with their own eyes. Think about it, if someone told you a story that wasn't true, and you knew for a fact it was false, would you go out and risk your life to spread it? Of course not. But that's exactly what Jesus' followers did. Let's look at the Gospels themselves. Matthew, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, wrote firsthand about his miracles and teachings. John, another disciple who wrote his Gospel based on his personal experiences with Jesus. Mark wrote his Gospel based on Peter's direct testimony as an eyewitness. Luke, a historian and doctor who carefully investigated and recorded eyewitness accounts from multiple sources. The Gospels weren't written centuries later, they were written within the lifetimes of those who knew Jesus. Jesus' resurrection was publicly witnessed by hundreds. One of the biggest arguments against Jesus' existence is that his resurrection was just a myth. But here's something shocking. Jesus' resurrection was not a private event. It wasn't just one or two people who claimed to see him alive again, it was hundreds. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3-6 wrote, Jesus appeared to Cephas, Peter, then to the 12. After that he appeared to more than 500 people at the same time, most of whom are still living. Paul was basically saying, if you don't believe me, go ask the eyewitnesses yourself. And here's something even crazier. This letter was written around 55 AD, less than 25 years after Jesus' death. That means people were still alive who had seen Jesus after his resurrection. If this was all made up, wouldn't someone have stepped forward to debunk it? But no one did. Instead, Christianity kept growing, because people had seen Jesus alive. The early church risked everything for this truth. If Jesus was just a story, then why did thousands of people in the early church risk their lives to follow him? Would you die for something you knew was fake? Probably not. The only reasonable explanation is that Jesus was real, and his resurrection was real. It wasn't just a few people claiming to see him, it was an entire movement of eyewitnesses willing to die rather than deny what they saw. So, let's recap. Historians confirm Jesus' existence. Christian writings outside the Bible prove he was real. Archaeology supports biblical events. Christianity spread despite persecution. Eyewitnesses were willing to die rather than deny Jesus. The evidence is overwhelming. Jesus was real. Now the question is, what will you do with this truth? Do you believe in Jesus? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos uncovering biblical truth, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching and God bless.